I wanted to create an ambient guitar sound using nothing but iOS apps. So the only hardware I'm actually using is a Gibson Les Paul electric guitar going into a Sonic port interface. All of the actual sound processing is being done by iPad apps. So I'll give a quick demonstration of the sound. This is a chord. And some notes. So you can see there's a little bit of natural swell anyway, and that's because I've got a transient shaper in the form of FAC Transient in the signal chain. So if I just play a chord gently, you can see it swells in naturally. However, I can create better swells by using Perforator, which I'll demonstrate later on. So I'm just going to take all these effects out of the chain so that we can talk about the raw guitar tone. So I'm using Bias Amp, and I've created a custom amp here, which I've called Clean and Warm. And that's what it sounds like. So this is essentially based on Fender Twin Reverb, but I've gone into Bias and I've tweaked all of the individual components just to make the sound a bit warmer. And the reason I've done this is because if we just go to default type Fender Twin that you get in Bias, it's just not warm enough for me. It just sounds a little bit too thin and trebly. The other problem with it is I don't really like the sound of the highs or the mid-range. It doesn't have the warmth of a real tube amp, which is why I've gone and created my own preset. And so this Bias Amp preset is downloadable on ToneCloud. If you tap the ToneCloud icon, you should be able to search for it. It's called Clean and Warm by Richard Yacht. So one thing to note with this Bias Amp preset is that it does require one of the in-app purchases Celestion cabs. I'm just going to show you what I mean. The cab that I've chosen is one of these impulse response based cabs from Celestion. I think each package costs about £20. I got them half price during Black Friday, but the one I'm using is in the Modern Vintage collection, and it's this one here, which is a 4x12. So the next step I've put in is Perforator, and that's to create my swells. So in order for Perforator to work, I'm going to need to run the transport. And so as the transport's running, you can see at the top left there's this sort of bar that expands, progress bar, and that shows me the lengths of my measures. Now I've actually got two measures set up here. It's a 2-bar sort of swell that I've created in Perforator. That's why there's 32/16 steps. So it means that here the swell doesn't work, but here it does, because obviously it only resets every 2 bars. Demonstrate that again. There it's not working, but here we get a nice swell. The next step in the chain is FAC Maxima. Obviously that's going to make everything a lot louder. And so I'm using this a little bit like you would use a compressor in a guitar pedal board, just to try and get a more compressed sound, and that also helps to minimize the attack on the strings. Next in the chain is FAC Transient. As you can see, when I use that, I get sort of natural swells, because the transients are being minimized. So the preset I'm using is called Paddish. And then after that, I'm using the RE1 tape looper for some delay. So that gives me a really nice tape style delay. And then next I'm using Virsyn AudioReverb, and the preset I'm using is the Taj Mahal one. However, the original Taj Mahal preset, just find it, has got a really crazy reverb time of 100 seconds. So I just dial that back to about 30 seconds for something a little more controllable. 100 seconds is really insane, but there's two things I really love about this reverb. One is that it just sounds really good. I think it's a combination of convolution reverb for the early reflections and algorithmic reverb for the late reflections, and it's just got a really beautiful and controllable sound, but also it does allow for these really, really long reverb tails, which are just perfect for this kind of ambient sound. You can see the difference without and with. Basically, it helps you to let the notes sustain forever. And then finally, I've got Enso looper in the chain, and that basically just allows me to record an initial chord progression, which I can then sort of jam over. It's relatively easy to use, and I can just have it at the end of the chain, record and play over it. Alternatively, you could just use the recorder in Orm to record a chord sequence just as effectively, but when I was doing the demo, I just thought that Enso was a little bit quicker as a workflow because you could just record your loop and start playing over it straight away. So to summarize, I would say that the main challenge on iOS when it comes to these kind of guitar sounds is getting a good starting tone, because most of the amp sims have a sound that's a little bit too brittle and trebly for my taste. It does take a bit of work to get a nice, warm, fat, clean tone. But on the other hand, the plugins tend to be really good. The dynamic plugins, the modulation plugins, the delays and the reverbs are all great. So I hope you found this short video useful, and thank you very much for watching.